It was all an illusion. It was all a fantasy. In short, it was all just a dream. Unfortunately, it took me 4 years to wake up. It was then that I realized it was all a nightmare. I was the weird kid at the end of the driveway. I was the kid eating his lunch at the table next to the trash can. I was the kid glued to the flagpole. Yes, I was that kid. And it was easy to see why. I never had a father. To her, men are evil. She spent years trying to banish evil from my soul and my body. So in grammar school, I wore pullovers and blouses with ruffles to avoid toxic masculinity. Basically, I spent my childhood with a target on my back. My mother was a religious fanatic. She tried every religion from Catholicism, my grandparents' faith, to Pentecostalism, but none of them were strict enough for her. Eventually, she started her own cult, which was a twisted mixture of snake conversion, the holiness movement, and second works of grace, alternatively called second blessings. On top of all this was superimposed her own feminism. Funny enough, I later learned that my mom only knew these terms and never really understood what they represented or meant, even feminism. She just made up her own meanings for everything. My house was always full of fat, frumpy women accompanied by either a sapphic partner or a pale, skinny, totally dominant husband. This was my mother's congregation. Her followers were mostly women who embraced her hatred of masculinity. All this was mixed in with the unhappiness of my childhood, and it never occurred to me that my childhood was unusual, except for the clothes my mother imposed on me. I thought everyone spent hours fasting and praying. I remember that I had friends in kindergarten, at least since I started going there. My mom was careful to keep me out of the den of evil that public school was for her. The school district forced her to put me in school when they found out from a concerned neighbor that I existed. I missed the first half of the school year, so once they sent me away, I was already a stranger. Everyone else had already gotten over their initial shyness, and I was left alone as a scared newcomer. Besides, I never socialized with other children because my mother kept me in seclusion. I never had playmates other than the ones I made up in my head. And they were nothing like those kids in kindergarten. But over time, my classmates reached out to me, and I learned the joy of socializing. This continued throughout kindergarten, although our school hours were different from other classes. We came in later and left earlier, and playground time was spent separate from the older kids, so we were shielded from them. That ended on the first day of first grade. As soon as the big kids saw me, the endless taunting began. There was no end to it, and it cemented my existence as an outcast. The problem was my mother's attempts to save me from the ills of masculinity. She styled my hair, which she refused to cut, into curls that would have made Shirley Temple proud. And although she didn't dress me in dresses, my clothes were all the most feminine things she could find. She never bought me jeans. I wore capri pants or pedal pants instead. I remember thinking that all pants had a zipper on the side. My shirts were girly blouses, all in pink and pastel colors. And the underwear? Let's just say I was well past high school when the question of boxers or briefs came up. The school realized that wasn't the best option for me and asked social services to handle my case. Mrs. Ormark was my social worker. She was also a deacon at my mother's church. The school was told to mind its own business, that my outfits were part of my mother's religious freedom. By my senior year of high school, I managed not to wear the most hideous clothes my mother bought me when I managed to scrape together or earn enough money to buy jeans and t-shirts at the local thrift store. The kind woman at the Salvation Army store took pity on me and let me buy enough clothes to get me through a week without wearing a single dirty one. I repaid her kindness by giving all the clothes I no longer wore to the army to sell. My mom made me kneel, pray, and fast all weekend when she found out, but she didn't replace the clothes. I was allowed to dress in second-hand clothes I bought. Wicked men's clothes. But it was too late to help. After years of bullying, I couldn't fit in and make friends. In elementary school, I was the weird kid with STDs, and in high school, I was the weird gay kid who was shunned even by the real gays. By then, I had given up trying. The humiliation was too great. After Shauna, I wasn't even allowed to have a partner in class. It was the first day of freshman physics class. Shauna and I were paired as lab partners despite her loud and stern objections. I think "not with that freak" was her kindest comment that day. As we approached the lab table, I saw that her stool was dusty and decided to dust it off with my hand, unfortunately just as she decided to sit down. My hand and her ass met. She jumped up and very loudly and vociferously stated that I had tried to grab her, as she put it, and more than once. She continued to talk about what a pervert I was for the next 3 years, until I left that school, cementing in everyone's mind that I was a pervert. My mother's church, with its now infamous castration revelations, as her sermons were called, did not help me overcome that image. So, no lab partners, no study buddies, no team sports, no gym class. All through high school, I sat alone, worked alone, existed alone. The only thing the Salvation Army didn't sell was underwear. So, without knowing that commando was an option, I still wore the underwear my good old mom bought me. I never knew that boys wore anything different since I was never introduced to PE. In high school, I never even saw the inside of a locker room. Deprived at home of that ungodly instrument of Satan, the television, I never even saw the Hanes underwear commercials. Unfortunately, the only pair of jeans I bought were a few inches too big in the waist. I pulled them up with a belt, but they were still baggy and loose. One day, when the textbooks were knocked out of my hands, this happened almost hourly, and I squatted down to retrieve them, Timmy Shaw, one of my main bullies, noticed the purple underwear peeking out from under my jeans. He cheerfully pointed it out to the older boys. I was surrounded by laughing classmates who pointed fingers at me, pulled out their cell phones, and shouted to their friends to come watch. Toward the end of junior high, things got better. Mrs. Ormark, my social worker, was sent to jail. I noticed that for a few weeks the husbands of my mother's other students seemed very nervous and tired. I don't think any of them slept well. Anyway, Mrs. Ormark was replaced by Mr. Jameson. After studying my case and talking to the school counselor, he insisted on weekly meetings. It took a few weeks, but eventually he got me to talk about my life, my mother, and my loneliness. I think he was horrified. He remarked that it was a good thing Mrs. Ormark had already been institutionalized because her treatment of me was criminal. He had second thoughts, and after a visit to my mother, when he really put the fear of God into my mother by threatening her with everything from jail to losing her Social Security benefits, he started spending time with me. He became the first father figure in my life. He also introduced me to his brother, who was an attorney. The brothers eventually organized my lawsuit against Social Security for the abuse I suffered as a child. My case was based on the fact that their representatives successfully blocked all attempts by the school to end my suffering. I won the case, receiving a large sum of 6 figures. Mr. Jameson's brother represented me pro bono, so, except for expenses, the entire amount was mine. This case also instilled in me a love of the law, courtrooms, and the entire court system. The deal allowed me to apply for emancipated minor status. I was free. Mr. Jameson found me an apartment in his building and taught me everything I needed to know. I had cleaned and cooked for my mother all my life, so I could easily handle those duties, but he helped me open a bank account and get into financial investments by bringing in a licensed counselor. He taught me how to drive and helped me find my first car. We went shopping, and now I had a whole new closet. Contact lenses and braces eventually got rid of my crooked teeth and heavy glasses. But the first thing I decided to do after my release was to get a haircut. Mr. Jameson took me straight from the courtroom to the barber shop. I cried as I watched my curls fall to the floor. The barber held up his hands and stepped back, asking if he had hurt me. "No," I sobbed. "I'm so happy. I'm so happy." After years of long hair, my short hair was sticking out in all directions. We went to the drugstore and bought hair gel and a hairdryer. Mr. Jameson showed me how much gel to use and how to shape my hair with the hairdryer. I didn't recognize the boy, no, the man who was looking at me from the mirror. I think I straightened up, maybe for the first time in my life. Mr. Jameson took me to sporting events, introduced me to running and the gym. He signed me up for karate classes, telling me that a man should be able to defend himself, and besides, I needed something to get me out from under the TV in the evenings, which I was quickly addicted to. It showed me a whole new world, a world where people could be happy. He also took me to the Catholic Church. He told me that I had a twisted view of God, religion, and our relationship with them. He enrolled me in CCD classes, Confraternity of Christian Doctrine, the religious courses of the Roman Church. He didn't need those classes, but he wanted to be there to help me understand, to give me context and explanations that my upbringing might not have provided. Or, more likely, my childhood would have made it difficult for me to understand. I was gradually struck by how loving and gentle Mr. Jameson's religion was. It was so different from my mother's hateful sayings. He also taught me how to ride a bicycle. That was another joy my mother had deprived me of. All in all, the second half of senior year gave me the childhood I never had. It was a time when I was learning to be a man. Mr. Jameson, or Will, as he eventually insisted I call him, was a real catch. It wasn't all fun games. They weren't always the most pleasant conversations, but shortly after my 18th birthday, Mr. Jameson sat me down at a table and answered questions that had puzzled me for years. I finally learned what had been confusing me growing up in this social isolation I was locked into. Mr. Jameson taught me how to be a man. That's exactly what my childhood was like. Loneliness, avoidance, bullying, and trying to figure out what manhood was that my mother tried so hard to protect me from. When I became emancipated, other problems were discovered. I had a slurred tongue when interacting with people. Even with Will, I had difficulty expressing myself, stuttering and whispering. The stuttering especially interfered with my ability to be quiet. Imagine a guy in pedal pushers and a ruffled blouse slowing down in high school. Not the most pleasant picture. To help me socialize and correct my speech, Will set me up with a speech therapist. I don't know what exactly he arranged, but it didn't take her long to fix my speech problems. The fact that I was a stunningly beautiful woman also helped me become more confident with women. It was wonderful. When our sessions went on even longer than I thought they would, I didn't mind. I was just happy that I had more opportunities to look at that beautiful cleavage. I never made it back to school. Will had made the brilliant move of getting me into an elite private school for my senior year. It was his alma mater, and he had pulled a lot of strings and enlisted support to get me a job there. I was still shy, but I had a good build and a nice face, and my shyness was mistaken for a strong, silent type. Girls asked me out on dates and dances. Without further ado, I became somewhat popular. I made friends, went to movies and parties, and invited girls to dinner. Suddenly, I was just an ordinary teenager, albeit an emancipated one. A week before high school graduation, my mom reappeared in my life. Somehow she knew where I lived, and as Will and I were coming home from karate class, she ran across the street with a knife raised above her head, screaming that God demanded my purification. I froze with fear. 18 years of living with my mother was hard to avoid. Will rushed toward me, coming between me and the Sheridan running toward us. Was he really risking his life for mine? The thought flashed through my paralyzed brain, but it was not to be. Mom ran out in front of the speeding truck. I swear I heard a crunch when it hit her. And just like that, a major female influence in my life was gone. I had mixed emotions. My mother had never been a nurturing person, but she was my mother. I hated her, but I also loved her. Why? Yes, she made my life miserable, but when I was sick or in pain, she nursed me and comforted me. People have told me that my mother was evil, but I don't think so. She was delusional and had twisted beliefs, but she believed, really believed in them. I don't think she ever intentionally hurt anyone, although I know she would have hurt me eventually. But I am sure that somewhere in the depths of her brain she believed that God had spoken to her and, like Abraham on Mount Moriah, asked her to sacrifice her son. But beyond the demands of her God, she was always kind to the women in her church, helping many of them through abusive relationships or financial problems. She was even kind to the men who asked for or needed help. My mother was on some sort of allowance all her life, but she never hesitated to share money or food with anyone she felt needed it. Yes, she made my life hell, but despite her beliefs, I think she loved me. Will insisted that I see a therapist because I witnessed my mother's death. I had one meeting with this therapist. She pointed out tellingly that I had never shed a tear over my loss. The only thing she said was that my main feeling about my mother's death was primarily relief. I agreed and never went back. Personally, I liked Mona's therapy better than this psychobabble. Will insisted I go to an Ivy League college and pulled strings again to get me into his alma mater. I had an amazing 4 years, but the most amazing of them all were the women, culminating in the goddess Eve. Eva and I met at a frat party my junior year. By then, I was fully settled in and socialized, thanks in large part to Will's help and example. I was relatively popular, being the star of the college chess club, a member of the cycling team, not as grandiose as being a member of one of the real sports teams, but it had some popularity with some female students. and a member of one of the best fraternities. Yes, it was Will's fraternity. I was treated like his legacy. Academically, I had every chance of graduating with honors, if not distinction, and my life was perfect. At least that's what I thought. But then I met Eva Stokes. She was a year older than me and had joined the chess club in junior high. She was an honest but uninspiring player. Gradually, when we started dating, she confessed that she joined the club for the sole purpose of meeting me, flattering to say the least. But by the time of this confession, we were already in an exclusive relationship. When I realized I couldn't fully meet her needs, a conversation about cohabitation began between us, initiated by me. I was afraid that I would lose her to her frustrations, that her attraction would lead her to infidelity. She raised her head and stared at me with panic in her eyes. "Are you saying you're going to break me up? Or are you breaking up with me?" She grabbed my hands. I was surprised by her question. It wasn't until I heard the words come out of my mouth that I realized they were somewhat ambiguous. "No," I shook my head. "I don't need either of those things. I don't think I can share you. The thought of being with someone else torments me. Just thinking about it makes me so angry I could punch a hole in the wall out of frustration. And I don't want to break up with you either. I know we haven't said it yet, but..." Here I hesitated before taking that step. "I love you. I want to marry you." Eve's eyes lit up and she started to reach for me. I stopped her. "I know you often get frustrated with my inability to keep up with you." I continued. "More than anything, I want you to be happy, and I want to avoid any more pain than the pain I would cause by losing you now. But if you don't think monogamy is right for you, then we should break up right now. I don't think my heart can take it later." Tears ran down her face. "Please don't leave me. You're all I've ever wanted. You're more than enough for me, and if I need more, I have Ernie. I want to marry you too. That's my greatest wish. It's all I ever think about. I'm yours and yours alone forever." She pulled me to her and pressed her face against my chest. Eventually, we both ended up in bed. Later, she asked if my proposal was accompanied by a ring. I wondered if stating that I wanted to marry her was a proposal, and decided that even if it wasn't, I wanted it to be. We went ring shopping the next day and got married a week after graduation. We went on our honeymoon and were desperately in love. She even left Ernie at home, a rarity I didn't know about yet. Our honeymoon was interrupted when Will suddenly became ill. Howard contacted me and advised me not to delay coming home. We rushed, even chartering a private jet, but we arrived only a few hours late. Will had passed away. Unlike my mom, I shed a flood of tears for Will. He changed my life and was the source of everything good and joyful in my life. To this day, I still miss him. He truly was my father in every sense of the word. As a social worker, Will was not a rich man. He had a home inherited from his parents that he co-owned with his brother Howard. He also had a well-funded 401k. His brother informed me that Will had named me as his sole heir. I tried to give Howard my share of the house, saying it should go to him since it was inherited from my parents. He refused my offer, saying that Will considered me his son and him, Howard, his nephew. We were one family, and he hoped I would live in the family home. Eva and I moved into the house as soon as Will's trust was deeded to me. After the bar exam, I took Eva on a month-long vacation to replace the honeymoon we missed. I rented a fancy schooner, and we traveled around the South Pacific for a month. It was gorgeous. We made love under the southern sky on secluded beaches and on the deck of the schooner, anchored while the crew slept. Ernie accompanied us on this trip, as he did on all trips after our first honeymoon. Eva needed to get her needs met, she explained. The crew was first alarmed and then amused by the sounds coming from our cabin while I was on deck. I thought, as long as Eva was happy, I wouldn't worry, and she was happy. We were both happy. We came back tanned, fit, and surprisingly in love. Eva got a job teaching at a community college. She had a choice between an elite private high school or a junior college. The high school paid more, but Eva explained that she thought she could do better in college. Besides, she saw herself as a college professor, not a high school teacher. She planned to pursue a doctorate in philosophy. I paid off all of her student loans and also covered the cost of graduate school. I could easily support her until she got her PhD. I went to work for Will's brother's firm Jameson, Atkins, and Fisher. They practiced both commercial and criminal law. Ed Fisher handled mostly criminal cases, and Howard, along with Terrence Atkins, handled the commercial side. They weren't a big firm, but they were well respected. It was a good fit, and I worked as Ed's assistant for another 12 weeks, during which time I had to wait for my college exam results. Legally, I couldn't work as an attorney, but Ed felt comfortable with me working in the background on his cases. I really wanted to feel like a full Perry Mason and was disappointed that we didn't represent murderers at that time. Most of our cases were simple assaults, road rage, domestic fights, or common crimes, burglary, shoplifting, or car theft. Even more frustrating was how often they were resolved through plea bargaining. It was several months before I got to see the inside of a courtroom. Ed explained that in most cases, two factors were decisive: the likelihood that the client would be proven guilty and/or could the client afford to fight in court. Even those cases that the court has ordered us to handle pro bono have usually settled. You must understand, most of our clients are guilty. They tend to be career criminals and are very realistic about their chances. They prefer to plead guilty, save time in court, and serve a third or less of the sentence they would have gotten if they had gone to trial. So much for Perry Mason. Ed joked that I should have spent my childhood watching Let's Make a Deal. Let's hear it from Monty Hall and Wayne Brady. At the time, this joke passed my consciousness. Eve explained it to me later. While law was turning into a total disappointment, Ava started teaching and fell in love with it. She came home every day happy that the students seemed to appreciate her lectures. When I asked who appreciated it more, men or women, she would look at me strangely and ask why it mattered. When I said that they probably appreciated her face and figure more, she got angry and wouldn't let me touch her. It was our first fight and the first time I slept on the couch. The next day, I managed to convince her that I was joking and in no way meant to belittle her teaching skills or lectures. I realized how serious she was about teaching and how much respect she felt she was due. After that, I became cautious about talking about her career. Ernie made more and more frequent appearances in our bedroom. Eva usually came home much earlier than I did, and often when we went to bed I could tell that Ernie had been at her place the night before. I figured it was Ernie. Eva had never given me any reason to suspect her of infidelity. When the bar exam results finally came in, I passed. Not only did I pass, but I was in the 90th percentile, scoring 320 on the LSAT. Howard, Ed, and Terry were thrilled. I was now a full-fledged employee of the firm. Even though I had become one of the 20, I was still immensely happy. Everyone was congratulating me on my high score, or so it seemed to me. I didn't immediately realize that I had lost someone I considered a good friend. Robert Garcia and I often had lunch together and got the same cases. Outside of work, Gloria and Eva became good friends, and the four of us often went out together. We made a good team, I thought, especially for someone who hadn't yet passed the bar exam. Bobby had graduated from law school the year before me, and although we both took the exam in July, it was the first time I had taken it, and the third time Bobby had taken it. This time he passed after 2 failures. But even now, he only scored 265, which was only 5 points above the required 260. He came into the office happy to have passed the exam, but seemed saddened when another assistant told him my score. Suddenly, Bobby had other lunch plans and Gloria had other friends she needed to reacquaint herself with. Eva sensed the rejection as much as I did and demanded to know what I had done with our friends. At that point, I didn't know. And when I approached Bobby, he first assured me that it was no big deal, and then added sullenly, "Jesus, do we really have to kiss your ass all the time?" He walked away, leaving me shocked and offended by his statement. Then another coworker who overheard the conversation told me how badly he reacted to my success. "He's just jealous. Not only did you pass the exam the first time, but you beat all our scores. You're a star." When I told Eva what was happening, she couldn't believe it. She couldn't believe that Gloria would leave her just because her husband was jealous. For the next few months, she refused to read the writing on the wall, sending Gloria invitation after invitation, but finally gave in. Her heart was broken. Eva was originally from the north and knew no one in my hometown. Gloria became her main helper and friend. They both worked in education, with Gloria teaching at a Christian high school. My wife was heartbroken and could not get over it. Eventually, we found common ground with people at the community college, but she didn't want to talk to anyone at the law firm. I started going to lunches by myself. It reminded me of middle school. I felt isolated, and ironically, It made me isolate myself even more. One day I came into the office and found other employees looking at me and giggling. This went on for a week. Then, underwear started showing up on my desk. I didn't know what to do. My tongue began to slip when I made presentations in front of giggling coworkers. Ava laughed at me when I started stuttering at home, and when she saw my face, she hugged me and asked me what was wrong. I told her what was going on at work, but she said they were all jealous of me and I should ignore them. As the days went on and my verbalizations failed more and more, Eva lost her patience and told me to get a grip. By the second night, I was already sleeping on the couch. The next morning, she apologized to me but said, "Really, Huck, this problem can only be solved by you. Just get out of your head and things will get better." It was obvious that she was losing respect for me, and it was affecting our lives. I missed Will. He would have helped me through these problems. Eventually, my stuttering began to undermine the cases I was working on. Clients had trouble understanding me. My work also began to go missing, sometimes mislabeled and more often missing altogether. Bobby would chuckle and smirk when I embarrassed myself in front of a client. I knew it was him, but I had no proof. Eventually, I was called into a meeting with the partners and Howard demanded an explanation of what was going on. I tried to explain that I felt alienated, that I was being groped. I explained that my documents were disappearing and in some cases being rewritten with errors that I would never have missed. In less than 2 months, I went from a stars to a stuttering, tongue-tied embarrassment. I thought I had overcome the trauma my mother inflicted on me, but it all happened again. I felt like I was there again, tied to the flagpole. And apparently, I was. During the meeting, Howard's computer beeped with an incoming message. Thinking it might be important to the current case, he opened it. A shocked expression appeared on his face. I noticed him scrolling through several images. "I think I know what this is about, Huck. You still have friends among the aides, and one of them forwarded me some emails that were sent to all the aides except you." With those words, he turned the laptop around so that I could see the gallery of photos he was looking through. "They were sent months ago. Your friend should have sent them to me then." There I was with my Shirley Temple-style curls glued to the flagpole. Photo after photo captured my childhood, including a video of my mother standing behind the pulpit preaching. My childhood nightmare on display. I stood up and walked out. Howard called out to me repeatedly, but I didn't stop or dare to go back. I was too depressed to even stammer. As I walked out of the office, I saw Bobby and a few other employees laughing. Bobby may have been the friend who forwarded the letters to Howard, if only to cement my humiliation in front of the partners. In the evening, I sent my resignation letter to the firm. Eva tried to talk me out of it, asking what would I do if I quit. Any law firm in town would probably have gotten those pictures from someone who had sabotaged me at Jameson, Atkins, and Fisher. And she was happy in college and didn't want to move to another city. She told me again that I had to man up. I opened my briefcase to get my thermos and clean it, and to my surprise, several pairs of underwear fell out of there. Eva looked at them and smirked. "I should have known," she said. "Gloria told me we were cut out because you hit on Bobby. That's probably why you can't keep a relationship going anymore. So much for monogamy." She left and slammed the bedroom door shut. This was the third night I slept on the couch. I couldn't believe that my wife, with whom I had lived with for over 4 years, could have such thoughts or believe this slander. I felt alone, even more alone than I had felt as a child. Without Eva, I was lost. My life had seemed perfect, but now it seemed an illusion. In the morning, I woke up to Eva saying, "I can't bear the disappointment you're causing me." She put on her coat and gloves. "I agreed to be monogamous, but you don't seem to want that." She smirked again, then continued, "You know, I targeted you in college. You had a great bank account. No family to interfere, no trust fund to block me. And girls talked about how great you were in bed. I didn't see that. I never have. Well, at least I paid off my student loans and my master's degree. Our divorce settlement should cover my doctorate. And then I'll stay with Bobby and Gloria for a while we work things out." Eva turned and walked out. It appeared that she had already packed her things and loaded them into the car. I sat stunned, watching her walk away down the street. But she loved me, I thought to myself. I couldn't believe she didn't. Howard showed up the next day. He refused to accept my resignation. I was family, and he needed me at the firm. How can I even show my face in public? I asked. Asked me? They've all seen me like this. Take a resignation letter. I was so distracted by my missing Eva that I didn't stutter or whisper at all. Howard sat looking at me for a minute. You know, when Will first told me about you, he described a child with an incredibly horrible childhood. He described it as heartbreaking. He doubted that you would ever be able to overcome those horrible experiences. Say, but he was determined to help you and was so proud of you, of how well you had recovered. He bragged about your strength. He laughed fondly at the memory that came to him. He called you Superman, a heroic figure. He called you his son. How proud he was of you. He stood up, getting ready to leave. Your job is for you. You're my nephew, but beyond that, you're our best assistant, or you will be when you gain experience. Ed says he'll be in trouble without you, that you understand some things better than he does. You know, the only thing that's changed is that more people know how you suffered as a child. That doesn't change what happened, and it certainly shouldn't change who you've become. Take your time and work on your linguistic skills. Mona told me to call her. He put a piece of paper with a phone number on the table and left. I didn't bother contacting Mona. I didn't go back to work. For 3 days, I sat in misery, waiting for Eva to return. Phone calls and emails went unanswered, not only to Eva, but also to Gloria and Bobby. I was alone. Finally, on the third evening after she left, I drove to Bobby's house. I was determined to meet my wife face to face. The lights were on in the house, but no one answered my knock. Someone had to be home. I headed into the side yard. Bobby and Gloria's house stood on a hill, with a view of the valley from the back terrace and pool. It afforded them the privacy most of us were deprived of. As I was opening the back gate, I heard sounds. I pulled out my phone and peeked around the corner. There, sitting on the deck, were Eva, Gloria, and Bobby. His new roar alarmed the ladies, and they looked up to see me delivering a few more blows to my lying lover. "Don't touch him," exclaimed Eva, as both she and Gloria stepped between us. "What the hell?" I demanded. "You're my wife. What happened to monogamy?" She smirked. "You gave it up when you came out as gay. Besides, I lied." Eve bestowed a sly smile on me. "I got a job at the college because my friend Ernie works there as a coach. We were having fun even before we got married. I am not gay. That's just a lie, Bobby." I wasn't sure why exactly the thought of being gay upset me in Eve's tirade. I suddenly realized that I didn't care anymore. I turned off the phone I was holding in my hand. You know what? They can take you away. I'm filing for divorce tomorrow, and I think Uncle Howard might have something to say about Bobby's employment after I file for adultery, naming those two as co-defendants. And Ernie too, if I find any evidence against him. I looked at my former friend's wife. And Gloria works at the church. They might find this video disturbing too. Gloria blushed. Bobby only groaned painfully. The good news is that I'm unemployed. My investments were made before our marriage. Will's inheritance, including our house, is in a trust for me, not including you. And the court will likely award me alimony since you are now the breadwinner in our marriage. I turned and walked away. I went through the house, figuring it was the shortest way. As I passed the open bedroom door, I saw Ernie's ex standing proudly on the bedside table. I stepped aside and took him in my arms. I had plans for him. The new series of humiliations showed me what Howard was trying to convey to me and what Will saw in me. I had a strong character. I could stand up to it all and find a better way to live. That's what Will had taught me. I informed Howard that I would be back as soon as the divorce was finalized. I wanted my wife to be the breadwinner in this marriage after the divorce. With my investments, I might not get alimony, but I could afford to try to get it just to torture Eve. And I would do my best to keep her penniless when the divorce was final. Back home, I'd close our credit cards and make sure all the bills were emptied. I planned to pursue Bobby in court. I would appear on the other side in any case he worked on, pro bono. I planned to humiliate him until no decent law firm would hire him. And Gloria? I figured that driving her away from Bobby with the help of the most beautiful women I could hire as her mistresses and getting them to dump her as soon as her marriage fell apart would be punishment for both Garcias. Besides, I had no hard feelings toward Gloria, other than the ones that are bound to arise from watching the video I made. I sent the video to the cloud and headed home to do 2 things. Introduce Ernie to my barbecue and find that piece of paper with Mona's phone number on it. She was only 5 years older than me. I think I needed another graduation ceremony. This could be fun. Part 2. The door was opened by the most beautiful and gentle girl Habakkuk had ever seen. She looked at him with an expression of intense concentration. "May I help you, sir?" the little lady asked formally. Huck knelt down in front of her, bringing their eyes together. "Perhaps," Huck began. "Are you the lady of the house?" The girl threw him the look that all little girls seem to possess. "Are you crazy, mister?" And then turned and shouted into the house, "Mama, there's some man at the door." When Habakkuk stood up, the adult version of the little lady opened the door fully. "Can I help you?" she asked suspiciously. Suspiciously, she asked. "Are you Meredith Larkin?" Huck asked, holding out his business card to the woman. Glancing at the card, the woman's eyes widened in panic. The words attorney seemed to catch her attention. She hesitantly answered in the affirmative. "What does that mean?" she asked with trepidation. Habakkuk sensed the fear that gripped the woman and tried his best to reassure her. "I am not here to add to your problems," he told her. "Moreover, I hope you will allow me to help you." He gave her his brightest smile. "What do you mean?" she asked warily. "As you can see from my business card, I'm an attorney. You are being sued by your former neighbor and tenant for illegal possession of your property. I would like to represent you in this case." Shaking his head and beginning to close the door, Huck added, "Pro bono, of course." The closing door paused, then opened again. "Why? Why are you doing this?" Smiling, he replied, "A fair question, but a long answer. Perhaps we could sit down and discuss it in the house or here on the porch." Still incredulous, Meredith agreed to sit on the porch and, without hesitation, offered Huck coffee, which he accepted. As soon as she returned with the drinks, Huck began his story. The lead attorney on the plaintiff's side is a former friend named Robert Garcia. I've vowed to destroy him in court in all cases he appears in or is associated with. That's pretty much it. Why? Again, why would you do that? What has he done to you? Meredith marveled at how honest such a vindictive man could be. Habakkuk was silent for a moment. Then he said, "I understand your suspicions, and I can tell you'll be asking why until I tell the whole story." He sipped his coffee. "Did you grow up in these parts?" he asked. When she answered yes, he inquired, "Have you ever heard of Rita Mason, about the feminist church?" Meredith's face lit up with recognition. "Castration revelations?" She laughed. "Oh, God, I remembered that. That woman was crazy." Huck lowered his eyes. "She was my mother." Meredith's face lowered. "Oh, God, I'm so sorry." Huck muttered that she wasn't as sorry as he was. "But wait," she asked. "Your card says your last name is Jameson, not Mason." "I took the last name of the man who helped me get out of the hell my mother raised me in. He was my social worker." Huck began his story by listing the steps his mother took to save him from toxic masculinity, as she believed he was the spawn of Satan. "Your own mother," Meredith whispered sympathetically. "How awful." Huck had led her through his life, the humiliations of childhood, the salvation Mr. Jameson had provided, emancipated minor, college, Eve and his marriage. He didn't bother to tell her about the plastic and real Ernie. It was too much for a stranger. Law school while Eve was getting her master's degree, Bobby's jealousy, and the destruction of his marriage. "And she never loved you," Meredith muttered thoughtfully. "So," Huck summarized, "I've tried to rise above it. I'm not a violent person, but I can't be attacked and left to my own devices. So I'm going to confront Bobby in court and offer him the humiliation that bothers him the most. So far, he hasn't shown up in the courtroom, but when I find out he's involved in a case, I do my best to help the other side. I haven't always won, but that's because I mostly stand on the sidelines. Lawyers don't like it when I get involved, even if it's to help." He shrugged. "But this time the case is going to trial, and I hear you haven't hired a lawyer yet. Why?" He looked at the woman and saw sadness settle on her face. "Money, why else?" She took the napkin she'd brought with her coffee and blotted her eyes. "When my husband died, we had more debt than savings, and working 2 jobs, I only make enough to keep the bills down. I can't afford a lawyer." Here the woman broke down and openly sobbed, the frustration of the last year overwhelming her. The little girl who had been eavesdropping through the window opened the door and rushed into her mother's arms, hugging her tightly. Habakkuk silently vowed to save this woman and child no matter what it cost him. Next chapter. The divorce had been finalized within the last month. Habakkuk had been putting off his revenge until the divorce and finances were finalized. As he had anticipated, because of his trust and investments, the court denied him spousal support, even though he was unemployed and his wife was still working. But the tape of his wife smirkingly recounting how she targeted him in college for his money had him pay for her education, including student loans, and planned to fund her doctoral dissertation, convinced the judge that what they married with was what they should get from him. His investment remained his investment. Eva was left penniless, as she had been in college, although she retained her school district pension. Huck had no claim to her income and benefits. On the other hand, she had no claim to his house, so she continued to live with the Garcias. The only retaliation he took was against his old buddy Bobby. Robert Garcia was immediately fired from Jameson, Atkins, and Fisher once it was discovered that he was the source of the emails revealing Huck and his childhood traumas. He was eventually hired as a junior associate at the ambulance-chasing firm of Stiller and Myers. Huck, still formally unemployed, although he had assisted Ed Fisher on some criminal cases behind the scenes and without pay, offered his services on a pro bono basis to the companies Stiller and Myers was suing if Bobby was assigned to the case. One of the firm's clerks was willing to keep Huck informed of Garcia's workload for a fee. Although Huck worked alone, Howard Jameson was happy to offer Huck the services his firm could provide as support. The assistance proved to be significant. Huck was able to successfully defend the companies in all of the cases in which he was involved. 2 companies declined his offer, and he was turned down several more times by the company's law firm, even though his services would have been pro bono. When Stiller and Myers finally realized that Huck Jameson had been instrumental in their defeat, they approached him with a job offer. He laughed and turned down the first and all subsequent offers. When they learned that he was acting as an unpaid agent, they finally wondered why. After learning that they were being pursued because of Garcia, they made him an offer, which he accepted. He would not work against them without pay if they would release Bobby from his job. In doing so, he reserved the right to go up against them with any paying clients. One of the law firms that twice refused his help was Strum and Deutsch. They subsequently lost both cases, not only with huge sums but also with additional punitive damages. The companies, each of which wanted to accept Habakkuk's offer but yielded to the law firm's refusal, subsequently fired Strum and Deutsch. The law firm blamed Habakkuk for their firing and happily hired Garcia. Unlike Stiller and Myers, S&D was a highly professional and respected group of lawyers. Their clients were huge firms that paid 6- and 7-figure fees annually, exceeding the actual value of S&D's legal services. Nevertheless, the loss of the client was painful, and as punishment, they expected to humiliate Huck in court. Garcia was relegated to a paralegal position while those in power searched for a case that would not jeopardize their large bills. The case against Meredith Larkin was a perfect fit. The client was not one of their corporate clients, but was a cousin of one of the senior partners. The case was being handled as a favor to a cousin who was trying to acquire Meredith's property for herself. Bobby was happy that he was finally being assigned a case, and even as a presenter. He would finally be able to show his superiors what a great lawyer he could be. His confidence waned when the 2 junior partners were joined by paralegals, and it soon became clear that Garcia was a lead only on paper. Next chapter. Gloria Garcia was forced to leave. At first, it was fun when Bobby and her put Eva to bed, and she even anticipated Ernie joining in the fun. So, a few times on Friday night, she'd made the excuse that she was going out with her girlfriends from work and then heading to Sappho's, her favorite bar. To hell with men. That night, she took a quick first drink of tequila and then signaled the bartender, looking around the room. She was surprised to see a familiar face light up when they met eyes. It was Regina, one of her junior high students from 2 years ago. Regina smiled broadly and walked over to Gloria. "Mrs. Garcia, my favorite teacher." Regina kissed Gloria on the cheek. "Call me Gloria." "Regina, you're no longer my student." Gloria patted the stool next to her. "Gloria, I have to tell you, I've always been head over heels in love with you." She laughed. Of course, there wasn't much competition, considering a lot of the teachers were old, dried-up nuns. Are you still in love? You're 18 now, aren't you? She asked hoarsely. My sister is leaving tonight. We could leave the house alone. Regina tilted her head and raised her eyebrows with an unspoken question. Let's go. Gloria didn't have to think long. Their affair lasted exactly 2 Fridays. For the second week, Gloria went straight to Regina's house. At the climax, the bedroom door opened and Regina's sister Ronnie appeared with a camera in hand. Gloria jumped up. Stop taking pictures. You have to erase them now, she demanded. Ronnie laughed and said, Sure, no problem. I wasn't actually taking pictures. Next chapter. When Ralph died, Meredith began, I was distraught. It was just Ruby and me. Kissing the girl on her lap, she told Huck her story. Ralph had no family and neither did I. And he ran all the accounts and savings. I was hopeless at it. So when Martha, my neighbor, came to help, I thought she had saved my life. Ruby was not even a year old at the time, and I was shocked. Ralph was proud that I was a housewife. I had never worked outside the home, so bringing up Ruby and making a home for my family was supposed to be my only job. But when Ralph was diagnosed with cancer, and suddenly, she stopped and hugged Ruby as another sob escaped her lips. Suddenly, Ralph was gone. And so was our income. I thought he had a life insurance policy, but I never could find it. Martha seemed so responsive. She sorted through my mail, sat with Ruby while I went to work, first at McDuffie's Burgers, then a second job at Priceco, to earn enough money to keep a roof over my head and food on the table. The real trouble started when Martha offered to move in with her, so it would be easier to take care of Ruby without having to shuttle back and forth. When I worked nights in the warehouse at Priceco, she could sleep in the guest room. It made sense, and she was so kind, I agreed. We had really become a family, I thought. When the tax bill came, she paid it before I even saw it. She said she knew I didn't have any money to spare. I had just started working, so it took a few months before I could make enough money to pay her back. I even had to sell some of my jewelry to raise enough money. Then she asked for the money in cash, said it would save her from having to go to the bank. She laughed bitterly. Saves her from going to the bank? What nonsense. Let me guess, Huck interrupted. Good old Martha lives here and pays her taxes. She's probably figured out a way to pay them for the next few years too, hasn't she? Just saved you the trouble. And you paid her off in cash. Meredith nodded sadly. The lawyer looked at Ruby. You're a big girl now, aren't you, sweetheart? Let me guess, you're probably 5, right? The girl smiled proudly and nodded. 5 years old. Martha claims ownership of the house by title, doesn't she? She's lived here and paid taxes for 5 years and you've never once objected. He shook his head. I haven't had a chance to object. I was at work all day and she was getting the mail. The first time I heard about taxes was when Martha asked me to reimburse her. She wiped her eyes. I thought we were family. She'd been so helpful to me. I didn't know she moved in with me because she was renting the apartment next door. She moved in to save money on rent, but I was grateful to her for helping Ruby so much. It was a fair exchange. In California, there's a 5-year time limit before you can claim adverse possession. Martha obviously knew that and chose you. The difficulty will be proving that you paid her taxes. It's undeniable that she's lived here all these 5 years, and I'm sure she has receipts to prove she's paid her taxes. She nodded. He continued. And she set it up so you have no way to prove you paid her. Cash doesn't usually leave a trail. Hopefully she made a mistake and transferred your money to her account. If we can subpoena her bank records, we'll have a case. It's going to be hard without it. Meredith snorted. I don't know what I'm going to do. I managed to kick Martha out of the house, but I can't afford to change the locks and she still has the keys. And I can't go to work. I have nowhere to leave Ruby. Smiling at the distraught woman, he pulled out his phone. We can fix all this. When he called a locksmith, she objected, saying she couldn't let him do it, that she wouldn't be able to pay him back. He held up his hand to cut off her objections while he gave instructions to the locksmith, who promised to come right away. After hanging up, he told her that she didn't have to pay him back, that he just wanted her to be safe. When she still objected, he thought he understood her. Look, people are helping me. People who didn't have to help me paid for things, and one, his eyes watered from the memory, one very special person left me his inheritance. Believe me, that's not a problem. And if you think I'm just another Martha who wants to take advantage of you somehow, I'll be happy to draw up an agreement that says, 1. I'll take your case for free. All costs and expenses fall solely on me. And 2. Your safety and Ruby's safety are considered an important part of the case and will therefore be provided solely at my expense. He smiled and summoned Rosa, who was his assistant at JA&F. She was a Hispanic woman in her 50s who had 8 children, the youngest of whom was only 10 years old. I told her about Meredith's childcare problems and asked how she was dealing with her own. 15 minutes later, the agency she was using promised to send some potential babysitters the next day for Meredith to approve. Meredith cried in frustration and said she couldn't pay for it. All right, Huck suggested. Tell you what, we'll sue Martha, and you pay me out of the proceeds when we win. And if we don't win? She asked. That's my concern, not yours. I'm happy. You can go back to work and Ruby will be taken care of. Isn't that what we're hoping for? The argument was ended by the arrival of a locksmith. 2 hours later, all the locks were changed and Huck left with the locksmith, promising to return for a childcare interview. Eva and Ernie were left out of work as the school board was presented with photographs of their relationship, as well as Eva and Garcia's relationship. Photos obtained by private investigator Huck using a camera hidden in a supply closet in the classroom, showing the couple having fun at work, were sufficient. The other photos were superfluous. However, the male board members appreciated the excess. Gloria was on top of things, as was Eva, as did some of the women. When Eva was told that the reasons for her dismissal would be included in all the recommendations the school had to provide, she realized that her career in education, which she had enjoyed so much, was probably over. Moreover, she would never be able to afford a doctorate. The idiot Ernie tried to console her by suggesting that she go to his house to talk one-on-one. Angrily pushing Ernie away, she cursed him and told him that it was over between them, that she never wanted to see him again. She also cursed her ex-husband and vowed revenge. It was enough for her that she had lost everything in the divorce, lost the lifestyle that her husband's wealth had provided. She'd realized she'd given her husband the ammunition he needed when she'd foolishly discovered she'd used him, married him solely for her own financial gain. Still, that asshole shouldn't have been so vindictive. And thank God the Garcias were still willing to give her shelter. She didn't have enough money for her own place. She pondered how she could cement her relationship with Bobby. He'd finally gotten a job at a great law firm, not unlike the one Huck had fired him from. Then again, he didn't have to be so damn vindictive. But now that Bobby was working at an even better firm than Jameson, Atkins, and Fisher, maybe he could fund her doctoral dissertation. Then Eve could find a college to work at. She just won't mention teaching high school, and she won't have to ask for a recommendation. Next chapter. Huck stopped Gloria in the parking lot as she was leaving school. She almost ran back into the house when she saw him, knowing how he stalked his wife and her husband. She was afraid of what he would do to her. He had threatened her with a job the night he caught them all, but he never fulfilled his promise. Hi, Gloria. I want to show you a movie. Huck held out the iPad. This never happened. I'm not doing this. Gloria hissed, looking around to make sure no one was around and no one could hear. There was no one. Oh yeah? Maybe I'm wrong. Let's watch the video. He pressed the play button. No, that didn't happen. You can't use that tape, Gloria pleaded. Oh yes I can, he stated, smiling smugly. Of course I won't, if you're willing to work with me. While Gloria agreed to anything she insisted, he scrutinized her body. He had watched the videos of her, his wife, and Bobby several times, and she was worthy of attention. He intended to enjoy a few sessions with this bitch before he went ahead with his revenge plans. He had a few graduation ceremonies with Mona right after his marriage fell apart, but since then Mona had fallen in love with a soulmate and gotten married. It had been a while since then, and Huck could think of a few things he wanted to do with Gloria. Besides, he had revenge to exact on Bobby and his wife, and he wanted to reward his private investigator, and a few other people Gloria might not like, but Huck could insist on his own. And then there were the sisters. Huck called Ronnie to tell her how well everything had turned out and to thank her and Regina again for their help. Ronnie brushed off his thanks. Hey man, you've helped the Twisted Sisters a few times already, all pro bono. We were happy to help you out. Huck made a mental note to add the sisters to the list of services Gloria was to provide. Bobby assured Martha that they had a good chance of unraveling the case. They would be able to prove that Martha had lived in the house for more than 5 years and had paid the property taxes herself for all 5 years without objection from Meredith Larkin. The case was open and shut. The case was so compelling that the two junior partners walked away from it, telling Bobby that they were sure even he couldn't screw it up. Bobby didn't bother to tell Martha about it as they smiled smugly at each other. Discovery let Huck's forensic accountant examine her bank accounts, which clearly showed taxes paid, but there were no deposits restoring that money to Martha's accounts. Huck was stumped. The facts seemed to be lining up against Meredith. Huck believed her version of events but didn't know how to prove the truth to the court. His private investigator saved the day. He so appreciated Huck's weekly gift of Gloria's glorious Gloria that he spent time and money illegally bugging Robert's office and the apartment Martha had moved into. And so, under pressure from Bobby, Martha admitted that she had a secret investment account into which her tax deductions were deposited. Huck could access that secret account. It would also hurt Martha's case if the judge found out that she and her attorney had hidden the account. Huck would have to find a legal way to discover this account so that it could be established that Garcia knew about it. But during Martha's meeting with Bobby, a bonus happened. She claimed that Ralph Larkin had an insurance policy with XYZ Insurance Company that Meredith never cashed in. Martha had all the correspondence with the insurance company, and she wanted Bobby to find a way to file a claim against her. To her disappointment, Bobby couldn't come up with a single scenario where Martha could make a claim on her roommate's life insurance policy. But Huck, being Meredith's attorney, contacted XYZ that same day and found out that Ralph had a $2 million policy that he had taken out before he was married. XYZ confirmed that the premiums were paid until 5 years ago, when the premiums began to be deducted from the cash value of the policy. They informed Huck that the cash value would be depleted before the end of the year, at which point the policy would terminate. But we have already informed Mr. Larkin of all this by correspondence. Why do you ask? Rep. Huck informed them that Ralph had died 5 years ago and that the account had been illegally withheld from his widow. When the representative objected, the attorney assured them that he did not suspect or accuse the insurance company of any wrongdoing. On the contrary, he was confident that they had acted honestly and that the illegal acts had been committed by a third party. Nevertheless, he informed the representative that Meredith would be filing a lawsuit based on her husband's death 5 years earlier. He then called Rosa and asked her to call several banks and investment companies to see if Martha had any accounts with them. On the list he sent to Rosa was the firm that Martha had told Bobby about. When Rosa found out that Martha had accounts not only at that investment firm but also at another bank, Huck was able to get a warrant to get documents on those accounts from an unsurprisingly pissed-off judge. When they presented the accounts to the judge, they found cash deposits there that matched the taxes paid. Huck also presented the judge with copies of all the correspondence the insurance company had sent to Meredith that she never received. Convinced that Martha handled all the mail, the judge issued a search warrant and instructed the police to search Martha's apartment. They were able to uncover insurance correspondence that Martha had saved in the greedy hope that she would somehow be able to collect on the policy debt. They also found notices from the state indicating that Martha had filed a claim of title to the property and had concealed it from Meredith. The judge turned the evidence over to the district attorney, recommending a fraud case against Martha. When the court fined Martha for withholding information about her investment and bank accounts, Bobby claimed that the accounts had simply been overlooked because Martha had assured Bobby that they were irrelevant to her case. Huck shook his head, realizing how stupid Bobby was. He then got Bobby to fully admit that he knew about the bills, but again insisted that they were irrelevant. The judge didn't see it that way. He referred Bobby and his firm, Strum and Deutsch, to the bar. The judge noted that the firm's two junior partners had appeared in the case as associates. The Bar Association eventually sanctioned the firm, but disbarred Robert Garcia for willful malfeasance. Next chapter. Before disbarment, Bobby was surprised when his wife filed for divorce, citing adultery with Eva and Ernie as the reason. Her lawyer? Habakkuk Jameson. Although Garcia claimed there was no adultery, that he and Gloria had an open marriage, Huck countered that the marriage was open to participants and both partners were engaged. His private investigator, and Gloria's secret, albeit unwanted lover, with Gloria's permission, set up several cameras in their home that captured not only Ernie and Eva with Bobby without Gloria's involvement, but also conversations about Bobby replacing Gloria with Eva. Garcia's courtroom behavior deteriorated during the trial, at which he insisted on representing himself. By the end of the trial, his arguments could be characterized as whining, which irritated the judge. This irritation manifested itself in his rulings. At the end of the trial, Huck was able to get Gloria 60% of their net worth, as well as the right to live in their home for the next 5 years, after which Gloria could buy her husband out or sell the house. Gloria would be entitled to 60% of any profits. During those 5 years, Bobby was to be responsible for 50% of the house expenses, including the mortgage. If he could not make those payments, they would be deducted from his 40% ownership, including interest. Huck believed his revenge on Robert Garcia had been accomplished, especially when the license revocation order was served the following week. Huck gave Gloria to a private investigator who, fat, bald, and 50 years old, couldn't believe his luck. He had never had a mistress who was as gorgeous as Gloria. Under threat of criminal prosecution, Gloria agreed to a 6-month sentence. Gloria decided that 26 sessions with this smelly man was better than years in jail. It was during the 5th weekend that the private investigator introduced Gloria to his friends. When Gloria's divorce was finalized, Eva found herself in deep shit. She started wandering around the sleepovers, staying with acquaintances who'd been wanting to entertain her for years, but soon tired of the bitchy bitch who was good-looking but incredibly demanding outside the bedroom. She rarely stayed in the same bed for a month. With no money in the bank and refusing to go to school, Eva applied and was accepted into a management training program for a retail company. Eva hated the idea. The position was clearly beneath her dignity. But as she was running out of lovers who could give her at least temporary shelter, she needed a job to pay for an apartment. An apartment that made her student apartments seem like mansions in comparison. She cursed her husband again for bringing her to this state. It was Huck's fault. It was, she told herself. As she was drowning her sorrows in the cheapest whiskey the rundown bar had to offer, the seat next to her was suddenly taken by a large, bearded man. "What if I give you $250? Ready to lash out at the man for his impoliteness, she suddenly realized that $250 was more than her salary for 2 days' work. She took a closer look at the man. How bad could he be? She smiled at the man. When Huck brought Meredith papers from XYZ for her to fill out, she collapsed on the couch and sobbed. Next chapter. Huck and Ruby rushed over to comfort her. Huck pulled her against him and comforted her, while Ruby and he told her it was okay, that everything was fine. Gasping, Meredith sat on Huck's lap and was finally able to mutter, $2 million. $2 million. She wrapped her arms around Ruby and pulled them both against Huck's chest. I was so afraid. I had nothing. How could I take care of Ruby? We were so lost. She pressed herself against his chest again and sat in silence for a few moments. Then she wrapped her arms around Huck's neck and kissed him passionately. You're our hero, she whispered. A year later, Ruby was a bridesmaid and Rose was the matron of honor. Huck watched with pride as Meredith floated down the aisle in the arms of her uncle, Howard Jameson. He knew this was the woman who loved him. God knows she was bringing him back to life not only for round 2, but round 3. His smile grew wider as he thought of the pleasure this woman gave him. They had gotten married just in time. Soon it would be clear to everyone that Ruby would soon be a big sister. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, so subscribe to my channel and watch the next video.